Welcome and welcome back to my kitchen. My name is Alondra and today we're making sourdough chocolate chip cookies. If you aren't a current sourdough baker, do not let that discourage you from making these cookies. I will include the instructions on how to make your quick discard in the description. So a couple things before we get started. I found this recipe back when I was making sourdough bread almost every single weekend, and if you've ever made sourdough, then you know that you end up with like copious amounts of discard. So I found this recipe online for sourdough chocolate chip cookies. The original recipe that I used to make these cookies is found on Sugar Spun Run by Sam Merritt. I've linked the original recipe that I used from Sugar Spun Run down in the description. I've made a few really slight changes to the recipe, and really it just comes from what I have in my pantry. The other quick note that I have to say is I don't currently bake sourdough bread, so I did not have a sourdough starter. That's not going to stop me. I looked at a couple different alternatives or substitutions that I could have made in place of a sourdough starter, and I landed on one that I think is going to work really well. Now, from my experience of bread baking, I know that a poolish is similar to a starter, but made with like an active yeast. Taking from that, last night before I went to bed, I mixed together 100 grams of flour, 100 grams of water, and like a quarter of a teaspoon of yeast, and just put that out in the garage. Even though it's not a traditional sourdough starter discard, had I not known that it was a poolish, just looking at it, I think is going to behave exactly how we want it to. So now that we have our sourdough discard, or in my case, a substitute version in our discarded poolish, we want to brown the butter that we're using in our cookie dough recipe. Taking our 1 cup or 227 grams of butter, we're going to melt that over medium heat in a small saucepan. After our butter is melted, we're going to continue to heat this over medium, stirring it frequently for about 8 to 12 minutes. As our butter cooks, it's going to start to bubble and foam, and we want to continue cooking and stirring this until our butter turns like a dark golden brown, and you'll notice a really nutty aroma. My butter started foaming so aggressively it made it difficult to see those brown bits separate out at the bottom, but you'll notice as soon as it boils hard enough that those brown bits are floating to the surface, I turn the heat off and start to cool it immediately. So as soon as our butter gets to the point where it's nice golden brown, we want to remove it from the heat and transfer it into a heat-proof bowl. Now, I don't need this to firm up to like a room temperature stick of butter, but I do want to get it cooled. So I'm going to take the bowl that I transferred it into and put it into the freezer for about 15 minutes just to rapidly cool it. It's still going to be pretty liquidy at that point, but that is totally fine for how we're going to use it in this cookie dough. While our brown butter is cooling in the freezer, let's quickly whisk together all of our dry ingredients for our cookie dough. So starting off, we have 340 grams or 2 3/4 of a cup of all-purpose flour. I have 3/4 of a teaspoon of salt, 1 teaspoon of baking soda, and 1 teaspoon of baking powder. Let's whisk. So then we'll go ahead and set those dry ingredients aside. In our large mixing bowl, let's transfer in our 1 cup of cooled browned butter, and then to that we'll add 1 cup or 224 grams of dark brown sugar and 2/3 of a cup or 133 grams of granulated sugar. So unlike creaming a room temperature stick of butter with sugar, this isn't going to get quite as fluffy. But we can whisk this together for about a minute, and you will notice it'll lighten in color and start to incorporate the sugars with the fat from the brown butter. All right, and then to our butter and sugar mixture, let's add both of our egg yolks. And 125 grams of our sourdough discard or discard alternative. All right, and then lastly, we have 2 teaspoons of vanilla paste. So we have all of our wet ingredients in our mixing bowl, dry ingredients, and then we have 6 ounces of dark chocolate chips. So let's add all of our flour into our wet ingredient mixture. Right, so now that this is almost totally mixed in, we'll add our chocolate chips. And then just the act of stirring these in is gonna get the rest of that flour to fully combine with our cookie dough. All right, so as you can see, we've got a pretty wet, moldable dough. Now, if we were to drop this onto our cookie sheet right now, just the heat of the oven would cause these to spread out way too much. So we're gonna pop this in the refrigerator for a minimum of 2 hours. Truth be told, I may or may not have already tasted the cookie dough at this point. Sam at Sugar Spun Run recommends 24-hour rest period. I wholeheartedly can confirm they are definitely better if you can wait that 24 hours. There's something about the Sourdough Discard developing its flavor in this cookie dough that is to die for. I don't typically have as much self-control as needed for waiting 24 hours to bake cookies, so I'm gonna wait at least 2 hours. That's gonna give the butter a chance to fully firm up and just make our cookies hold their shape better and bake up better once we scoop them and put them into the oven. So I am notorious for forgetting to preheat my oven until I'm ready to put something in there. So before we even start our cookie scooping process, I'm gonna preheat my oven to 350 degrees. So by the time we're done, my oven is ready and we can just put them straight in there. So to prep our cookie sheet, we're just gonna line it with one single sheet of parchment paper. All right, so pulling our dough out of the refrigerator, very different texture. We went from being kind of pasty or really moldable to a much firmer dough. Now, I have a preference. I like to use a cookie scoop. This one that I use for these is, I think it's technically a 1 tablespoon scoop, but they end up being probably closer to an ounce. I'll scoop them out into like a heaping spoonful, and then after I've gotten all the cookie dough scooped, I'll go back and just kind of roll things out. So as far as the size of cookie sheet that I use, I find that baking 8 cookies at a time gives them plenty of room to spread without coming into contact. Because I like to use the cup method to like round them out when they come out of the oven, I need a little bit of wiggle room on the sides of each cookie. So I'll typically drop 8 cookies per sheet. All right, so these are gonna bake for about 10 to 12 minutes, just depending on your oven, until the edges are set and golden brown, but the center is gonna look like the tiniest bit underdone. I love a cookie that has a crunchy edge, but a soft, chewy center. So that's kind of the place where I'm aiming for when I'm baking. Coming out of the oven, we wanna leave these on the cookie sheet for about 2 or 3 minutes. The residual heat from the cookie sheet is going to finish the setting process of our dough, so we don't end up with a totally underbaked cookie, but that soft, chewy center. Now, totally optional step, but I really like the look of like a perfectly round cookie. So after these come out of the oven, I'm gonna take one of my like small glass cups and I'll swirl it around on top of the super hot cookie as soon as it comes out, just to give it like a really cute, perfectly round appearance. Totally optional. It doesn't make it taste any different, but I just think they look really nice that way. And then we will transfer them over to a cooling rack and enjoy. All right, we got less than 2 minutes. Oh, we have 1 minute until they're ready to come out of the oven. By doing my little like cup swirl, we end up with these like very picture perfect round cookies, which I just think they look really nice. So the first batch of cookies ended up baking for the full 12 minutes. And I think these second ones are also gonna end up being 12 minutes. So our full batch of cookie dough made a total of 33 dough balls, one of which was lost to the cookie dough tax. So the 32 that we had remaining, I baked in 4 rounds of 8 cookies. I think they turned out perfect. My name is Alondra. Today was our episode 6 of our Back to Basics series where we made chocolate chip cookies. If you enjoyed hanging out with me today, please like this video and subscribe for more recipe shenanigans. And I'll see you in the next one.